Look, this is, again, the reason we did this teaching after the unity and division teaching is because I want to make sure we're not allowing something like Shabbat to cause division. By the way, if we're all keeping it on different days, that automatically is division. It is. Here's a funny thing that will happen. We will get contacted from time to time by someone who believes that they're supposed to do the lunar Shabbat. I'm not mocking anybody that does. But then they'll say, is it hypocrisy if I keep the Saturday one because I'm finding it very hard to keep the lunar one because of the way the world is today and the job and everything? And I'm like, didn't you think that Yahweh would know that we'd be living at a time where it'd be very hard for you to keep a lunar Shabbat? Maybe the problem is that the lunar Shabbat's the problem, not Shabbat is the problem. Because quite frankly, the only people on the planet that can keep a lunar Shabbat are people that work for themselves and unemployed people. And by the way, we have a lot of wives that are very upset that their husbands have chosen to go to lunar Shabbat direction and use it as an excuse to not work. And so they now are living off of government or whatever they're living off of, so that because after all, they can't find a job that will give them off Wednesday this month and Thursday next month and then Tuesday the month after that because it rotates and moves like that. And you can't. Unless you're in ministry or working for yourself. And even if you're working for yourself, let's say part of your business is to have some sort of business out there. It's going to be a little confusing for the patrons of your business that, well, we're closed Wednesday this month. Next month, we're closed on Thursday. Next month. By the way, here's the other really weird thing, and I know a lot of people that have been keeping and not keeping the lunar Shabbat for a long time. And we get some who do every feast, and I always ask them just be respectful of, not disturbing anybody who's here, because most of us don't. But the funny thing is, it drives them a little dizzy, and it's very weird when it falls on Sunday for a month. And now they're keeping Sunday. Because it does, like twice a year, fall on a Sunday. All the time. And then I got to imagine that's kind of strange for somebody who already grew out of that and just came away from Sunday worship to end up back on Sunday. So it creates some very humorous moments, I think, at some points. Okay? Now, this is not an invitation to send me 500 emails arguing with me about the lunar Shabbat. I have already had some of the best send me everything they've got on it, and I've read it all, and I'm still convinced that it's wrong. It's not scripturally correct. So you're not going to change my mind, so don't send me the stuff. And don't think I haven't read it and don't know the verses, and that you have the unique verses I never saw. I saw them, trust me. I've not been doing this rodeo for 5 minutes. I've had to deal with the lunar Shabbat for over 15 years, okay? It's not new to me, okay? And I know people that were teaching it and leading it and dealing with it from a leadership point of view who are in front of big groups of people who have sent me all of their teachings and all of their understandings of it for many years. All right, so this is not an open season. Remember, unity and division. I didn't bring this subject up to start a debate or a fight. Paul says, arguing over Torah, right? Titus 3:9, arguing over Torah is unprofitable. It's useless. It's not a good thing to be doing. So let's not argue about it. My job is to teach you my understanding. If you have an understanding that's different, get a microphone and teach people your understanding. Nobody's stopping you. But don't think for a second that I haven't done my research. I know you've done yours. I know everybody, for the most part, that has come to the conclusion of keeping that particular way of doing things has done their own research. We're going to deal with this also with the sundown to sundown versus sunset to sunset thing. Sunrise to sunrise thing. Again, I know people have done their research. I will still, by my responsibilities, to tell you what I believe it says and make my case for why that's what I believe. Okay? And so hopefully you can understand that. But again, this is not, don't anybody get offended. I know you came to your beliefs and your conclusions legitimately. Mine are just mine. And if yours match with mine, great. If they don't, great. It's okay. All right? But the gauntlet out there is I want the documentation of when the Jews switched Saturday from the lunar Sabbath. I actually heard one teacher Make an argument that Yeshua was just by tradition keeping Sabbath with his Jewish brothers just to be nice, but he kept the lunar one with his disciples out in the woods somewhere. I said, now you're just making stuff up. I told him that. I said, you're just making stuff up. But he said that in a teaching. I said, how can you say that? Well, he needed that to be true to back up his argument. Because he knows there's no documentation to show the Jews have changed. So he needs the Jews to have been wrong in Yeshua's day and that they kept it off privately on their own somewhere, even though that's not documented anywhere. He needed that because he knows there's no evidence of the other thing. I know it's a great argument that they make, and it sort of makes sense, and it has holy days falling on Sabbaths and all that kind of stuff in a nice, convenient way. That doesn't change the fact that it's not what we have. So we need evidence, we need proof. And there just isn't. Okay, questions, comments in the Afterburn. Let's keep it to, and if I don't answer your question, it's because I may tell you I'm going to cover it next week or the week after. Let's try to keep it to just what was covered today. I promise you we will cover probably whatever else you want to cover next week or the week after, because this will probably go at least 2 weeks. It may go 3. I haven't looked at my notes, but it'll probably go, I know it'll definitely go 2 because we're not finished, so we have at least part 2. And hopefully we'll cover everything that you want covered by then.
By keeping Shabbat, we're identifying with the spirit of his word.
Yeah.
And he can, from my own experience, from somebody that's worked, 7 days a week for 25 years, he can do more for you in 1 day of rest than you can do for yourself working all week long.
Amen. And to add to that and build on that, you can be refreshed and rested here more than laying in your bed or staying in your house. I've had husbands or wives here, and I said, well, where's your spouse? Oh, they're Shabbating at home. They're what? They're Shabbating at home. They were tired and just decided to stay home. If they were tired, they should have come here. This is where the energy is. This is where he breathed life and refreshment. Remember, we talked about the idea of it being like a breath of refreshment, like a wind and an energy in the Shabbat. Coming here, you feel more energized and you feel better. Not staying home.
This is really interesting. I love the part about the way he blessed the Shabbat and the energy. If you remember back in the 70s and 80s, they used to have things called harmonic convergences. And, the New Age people, where we're going to get peace on earth because we're just all going to get together and at the same time, wherever you are in the world, we're going to have gatherings and our human energy, we're going to just go and our human energy will do this. Well, there's some truth in that because the human energy, when you're in sync and you're in agreement, there is a power that goes out. And there is a power that transforms whatever is inside you, the more people are doing it with you or thinking and agreeing with you. But when I thought about what you said about the blessing on Shabbat and how the Creator made everything out of energy, it reminded me of this harmonic convergence idea. And I thought, wow, okay, so on the seventh day, I'm coming here, I'm getting together with all of you, and we're all here together in live stream too. And we're
of
all
one
here.
mind, of one accord.
We're all in one mind, and we're one accord. But not only do we have our own harmonic convergence, he has infused this day with his energy. And I am amazed at my own testimony and so many others I talk to as they begin to get the rhythm of this and come into it wholeheartedly, experience a revelation. You open the scripture and just stuff starts pouring in and just a certain sense of his love, of his care. There is a great refreshing in it. And then on top of that, you stop and think, my brother Judah, all over the world, is loving Elohim on this day. What a power in the earth that may be why we can be fresh and green in old age.
There you go.
We're getting refreshed.
By the way, you have, that's why people like to have the national Shabbat or international Shabbats where they get everybody together on the same day. You know, the Jewish community has an urban legend idea that, you know, if all the Jews would ever just keep Shabbat on the same Shabbat that one day, because you got a lot of Jews that don't keep anything, that Messiah would come. Okay, I learned that in Hebrew school many, many, many years ago. I was 3, 4, 5, 8 years old, whatever. Oh, you know, Messiah is going to come when we can get all the Jews to just keep Shabbat the same week, 1 year. You know, just one day, just everybody would keep Shabbat, and Messiah would come. Of course, there's no scripture for that. That's just one of their little things. But the point is this, though. We have our own experiences to know something is going on. There's something happening, okay, with Shabbat. But also, and I was just thinking about this, when you look historically, and the idea of, I was thinking about how the Jews were threatened, you know, to break Shabbat and everything else. You know, the early church fathers, who are not any of my favorite people on the history of the universe, but the early church fathers had this idea of not Judaizing, and that's why they moved things to Sunday. Now, they didn't move it to Sunday because the Jews were keeping Wednesday some weeks and Thursday some weeks and Friday some weeks. They moved it to Sunday because they were keeping Saturday every week. That's part of your historical proof that after Yeshua, the Jews were keeping a straight numeric count day. And so they were keeping the seventh day, and then the Christian community started keeping the first day, as to not be like the Jewish community. And so there's more historical proof. Very shortly after, and for a few hundred years after the death, burial, and resurrection of Messiah, there's this shift, and it's because it's in a backlash, it's in opposition to what the Jews were doing. And so we have more record of the Jews keeping the seventh-day Sabbath the way they do it today. Can we agree that historical record is there? Okay, so there's more evidence. The problem is, I don't want to offend everybody. We talked about in the unity and division, in our immaturity, I'm not picking on you, I'm immature, everybody is. In our immaturity and our lack of understanding, we tend to get very Gnostic and loving information and learning and knowledge. And our Gnosticism, the more out there, complicated and cool thing we can find, like, oh, this seems to fit so beautifully, because if they go by the moon and the 7-day cycle, then what you have is that the 15th of the month, when you have the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and when you have Sukkot, wow, that's always a Sabbath, because Sabbaths are on 1, 8, 15, 22, 29. I mean, on 8, 15, like that. So you have 8, 15, 22, 29. So all those 15s that you see in the holy days, those are always Sabbaths. Yeah, it fits. So what? I need more evidence than that. I can give you lots of things that fit that you don't see any scripture for. I can give you absolute proof that keeping Shavuot based on the last holy day count, not the first holy day count or the Sunday in the middle, is actually the right way to do it, because my way will fit. Doesn't make it right, though. Because if you do it my way, you'll end up with a full moon on Shavuot, just like you have on Passover and you have on Sukkot. If you start counting from the day after the last holy day of Passover and unleavened bread. But there's no scripture for that. There's no evidence that the Jews ever did it that way. It'll work, though. It'll work perfectly. It puts all three of your Shalosh Regalim, it puts all three of them right on a full moon. So what should I convince everybody to do it my way now? Because it works? Because it makes some logic to me? I was looking for us to obey him and to follow in the way he did things, and he put the Jews here for a reason. And it says so in Genesis and in other places, and Paul says it too. And we have to stop disregarding them with such an incredible frequency and disdain for what they do. I'm not asking you to elevate them and put them in rulership over you, but let's give them credit where the credit is due and appreciate what they were left. You want to talk about left behind? Israel was scattered. They were left behind. For what purpose? Because without them, you don't have this book. They're the ones who kept it for you. Oh, no, God did. No, he used them to do it. That was his choice. You have no Torah, no Tanakh, nothing without the Jews maintaining it on threats of death for century after century after century after century after century. And with all that going on, when they said, keep Sunday, I was like, well, give me a couple of months, it'll be on Sunday. If it was the lunar Sabbath, that's what you end up with. But that's not what they do. It's the 7-day cycle. Creation week, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, Shabbat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, Shabbat. That's all you have. Creation week didn't start after a new moon. What day do we find the sun and the stars and the moon? 4. That kind of messes with the count. Just saying. So then the argument is, no, the sun and the stars and the moon were all created on day 1 or whatever, and then he only kind of puts them in authority on day 4. Okay, whatever. Now we're spinning things again. Okay? Now we're spinning things again. So we have to be careful. All right? You can't conveniently ignore verses or information that's available. And that's what you have to do, unfortunately, to end up in some of these places.
Thank you very much for the teaching. I wish we would have had it probably 20 years ago, but this is just...
Well, I had one 15 years ago.
We didn't know you then.
First time I taught this was in 2000 or 99, so you could have gone back a ways.
The comment I have is for those that are out there surfing the web and looking for the anointed person, coming from a background, well, we won't get into that, but there are, for those that are searching the web, to be careful. There are Hebraic teachers, Messianic, whatever you want to call it, labeled. And I know of one personally that held a wedding right after Shabbat services. And that shouldn't be on Shabbat because, as you said, it is the bride's day. Yep. And he was a Jew. He wasn't a rabbi that was not of Jewish descent. Should have known better and didn't. So for all those people that are out there that are ready to jump on you that it's wrong to go to a wedding on Shabbat, I'm just thoroughly behind you, and I praise and thank Abba for you.
Appreciate that.
Bless
Look,
you.
these choices are going to be tough in your families, but you know what? If you go to the Jewish community, the observant Jewish community is not doing weddings or funerals on Shabbat. They don't. Okay? My wedding was on Sunday. Okay? It was not on Saturday. Okay? And it wasn't because I was a Sunday keeper. It's because I wasn't doing it on Shabbat. Okay? So, but you know what? You're going to have challenges, though, when family members are going to get all mad at you for not coming to a wedding, especially if it's your son or your daughter, or your sister or brother's son or daughter, or your brother or your sister, or whoever it is. Just make sure once they get engaged that you tell them, look, I want to come to your wedding, but just know if you're going to do it on a Saturday, I won't be able to come, so please pick a different day. Because in their understanding of Sunday, it doesn't disturb Sunday worship at all. They can do it on Sunday. The Christians have never had a problem with you doing a wedding on a Sunday, so do it on Sunday. It doesn't bother anybody. It doesn't mess with anything. But I know it's a challenge. The first time I did this teaching here at Beth Shalom, since we've been here in Tennessee, this time around, I did it at a time where I was just so frustrated looking at a half-empty room because it was in May and everybody was going to graduations and nobody was in services. And I'll be like, well, where were you last week? Well, you know, my son graduated, my daughter graduated. Well, so what? Are you setting it apart to Yahweh? My wife will tell you she was a Sabbath keeper her whole life. Sadly, I wasn't, even though I was raised a Jew, but we were secular. But she was a Sabbath keeper her whole life. She graduated from everywhere she graduated and never went to one that was on Saturday. But she still graduated. See, they don't hold back the certificate just because you don't show up to graduation. You still get it. And you still get to move to the next place. And so she missed all her graduations because I think almost all of them were on Saturday. But that's just what it was. But now to this day, she's got family members that are now in that next generation that are graduating, and the family's all going on Saturday graduations. And that's where we look back and go, what happened to the family? And I'm not picking on her family. This happens a lot in all families. There was a line that was drawn that now they're not, that line is moved. Okay? And some of them were going to a Seventh-day church high school, and they're doing their graduation on Saturday. And this is a school sponsored by a Seventh-day church. So that's why people say, well, it must be okay because the church is sponsoring it and they're Sabbath keepers. Are you guarding it, though? Are you making it kadosh Yahweh? Set apart to Him? My wife had to get into almost a problem with a sister one time, and it was really my fault because she had just gotten back from Paris. And if you know my wife, you know she is not afraid of a camera. She's a shutterbug. She loves to take pictures. And so she came back with, just piles of pictures when she had gone. And she had them actually printed out. She went to like Walmart or wherever you go, to take the digital things and get all these pictures. And her sister came over, and it was Shabbat. It was after Shabbat was almost over. Had about an hour or two left before sundown. Came over to her father's house for dinner. And right away she was like, oh, did you bring the pictures from Paris? She said, oh, yeah. She goes, oh, bring them out. And I looked at her, I said, can we wait 2 hours and just after sundown? Because as soon as you bring those pictures out, we're now no longer kadosh Yahweh. Now we're set apart to Paris. Because all we're going to think about and focus on is the pictures. Does that make sense? So I said, let's not do that. It's only another 2 hours. It was not that long till sundown. Just wait. I don't think her sister talked to us for like 2 years after that. She was so mad. But to my wife's credit, she said to her, my husband's right, and we're going to wait. So I give Julie a lot of credit for that. But it's not, you can't wait an hour or 2 hours. I've had to go up to people during the oneg after services and say, whatever you're talking about right now probably should wait a few hours. Let's keep it about loving each other and loving Him and doing the things He would want on His Sabbath. Okay? Now, getting to know each other, like if a new person comes in, that's part of the 2 commandments, loving each other and loving Him. That's fine. But you don't need to spend 2 hours talking about some problem that's happening at work or some problem that you're having with your house or your car or whatever it is, and then the next thing you know, you're focusing only on that. Try to protect the time. We're going to talk about that more next week when we get into the mechanics of this. But it's about how can we actually focus? Can we really focus on Him just for one whole day? That's all it is, one day. Can we just focus on Him? Can we get our eyes off of our own selfish stuff for one day? It sounds ridiculously easy to do, but it's not. Because we're so self-possessed and self-obsessed that it's so hard to do. It just is.
You talking about the graduation. I wish I knew that about 5 months ago, but oh well, already graduated. So just a couple of things.
Yeah, but you know what though?
Yeah.
He appreciates that where your reaction is that had you known, you would have done it differently. That's the difference, okay? Is to say, I wish I'd have known, because if I had, I would have made a different choice. Because that's what Abba doesn't want you to go back and feel terrible and guilty about every stupid thing we've done in our lives, things that we didn't know better. But He'd like to know that if you could, you would do it different. So good on you for that.
Yeah. So by the way, I really, really like this teaching. I really like how you talk about the energy that Sabbath is supposed to have. And anyway, there's so many things I was taught about Sabbath just growing up and different people. And, some people literally would sleep all day. And I was so bored as a kid, like, oh, this is so boring. And I hated Sabbath. I mean, I pretended to like Sabbath, but it wasn't, it just, anyway.
I blame him for that.
Well,
for those of you on screen, that's her father over there, and she's sitting over there. So
okay,
I'm just teasing you. I'm just teasing you.
But
Greg.
I mean, it was also people in the church and everything,
Yeah.
and it's really, really funny too because I'm so excited to go. I guess you wouldn't call this church, I don't know, whatever. I tell people that it's church and they can relate to that. So I say, oh yeah, I'm going to church, oh, when are you going? I'm going at 1. Oh, when are you going to be done? Oh, I don't know, probably the middle of the night sometime. What? And people are so confused. And they cannot understand, like, why would you want to be at church all day? And they cannot relate to that. They give me this look, and I'm like, oh, I can't explain it. I've tried to explain it, and I gave up. So I don't explain it anymore.
Well, the reason is, by the way, because it cannot be explained. It can only be experienced.
No. Yeah,
Okay.
and I never experienced this at church. You go to church, and it doesn't really matter whether you're there or not. People usually don't even know if you weren't there the last week, type of a thing. And it's so different. But anyway, just wanted to say that. But I also had a question about just something that I heard, and I'm taking a religion class. So, we're learning all about the way the Jews were thinking during Jesus' time and, all of that. And so I don't really say anything in class. I'm just kind of listening and like thinking and all these questions. But you wouldn't believe some of the things that they say in that class. But one thing I just wanted to ask you about is I've heard my professor say that, the Sabbath, the reason that they keep the seventh-day Sabbath is because the Bible explicitly says, remember the Sabbath. But, the other Sabbaths and the other feasts and stuff like that, well, it doesn't say remember those Sabbaths, and it's not in the Ten Commandments and all that stuff, so those don't matter. And it's really weird talking to Adventists because, they get the Sabbath, but they don't get the other stuff. And I guess I was just wondering how you would connect those two together.
Yeah, well, it's again, sometimes people, and we've already talked about how they get Gnostic and they want to just go way overboard, trying to get too much information, so to speak. Others have decided they only want so much information, and then they stop. And that's what you have in the Adventists, is that they got their information and they don't want any more. Okay, so if it's not anything that they've been doing since 18 whatever, then they're not going to be, 1844, whatever it was, then they're not doing it. Okay? And so if you can't penetrate that solid granite, it's just not something that he can do it. You can't. So what happens is they're not allowing the book to show you more of the pieces of the puzzle. Because when we look at the Shabbat, we see that it's called a Shabbat Shabbaton. We see that also is in the holy day ones that they're not wanting to keep. It's also a Mikra Kodesh, which you also see in the holy days. Okay? But see, this is that dispensational thing that all denominations tend to fall in, which is that was for them, it's not for us, or that was for then, and that's not for now. And they try to do almost this kind of Melchizedekian thing, like the guys who do this Melchizedekian thing, which is they say, well, that was in the book that was outside the ark, and this is what was inside the ark, so this is what we have to do, and this is what we don't have to do. That was ceremonial, this is moral. They're trying to find reasons not to do. And that is dangerous. Okay? That's a wrong mindset. He didn't just say remember, he said guard. And by the way, he took the Sabbaths that are the holy days just as seriously. He said, these are my appointed times. And in that list, he starts with the weekly Sabbath and then doesn't differentiate any difference between that one and all of the rest of them that follow after that. They're all part of the same list. But you can't convince the Adventists of this. So don't try. He has to do it. Okay, it's an argument that's just not going to go anywhere. And so remember, arguing about Torah is unprofitable and useless and should not be done. Don't argue. You can discuss. Discussion means that I'm talking to you and you're listening, and you're talking to me and I'm listening. Once it's you're talking, I'm talking, nobody's listening, now you got an argument that's useless. So also in a discussion, generally speaking, you need both people to actually be interested in the discussion. Not one person imposing the discussion on the other. Okay, that doesn't do very well either. So let's not do that.
I have another problem with my grass cutter. I didn't set up with today, and he usually cut Wednesday. But rain and slow growing, whatever, So this morning I left it. He's trying to cut the grass. So I say, Tom, why are you cutting today? He said, well, we didn't set up today, so that's his problem, not our problem.
Well, it is still, but it's within your gates and you have authority
I
over
know,
that.
that's why I'm just-
So in the future, you're going to want to be, look, I'll tell you what happened. We were actually at Sukkot. No, at Passover. Was the last Passover when I caught the guy mowing the lawn? It was Passover, Sukkot. But anyway, even the property that we were renting for Passover, one day I came outside of the Blue Lodge and the guy was mowing. It was a holy day. It was the first holy day. And I said to him, hold on, time out. Because first of all, he was starting at like 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning and he woke me up. So I wasn't happy about that. So you can all imagine how happy I'm at 8 o'clock in the morning. And the guy's all over the, So I actually got enough, I got dressed and went outside. I said, excuse me. I said, what are you doing? And the owner of the property, the people there weren't even there. This guy just was taking it upon himself. I said, no, not today. You'll have to just talk to them, but no. And so he packed up and left. He was happy to go. He didn't mind. But you have to take authority over what you have to take authority over. Now, in this town, see, but you're over there in Church of God country. They don't understand as good as Adventist country over here. But in this town, because we're surrounded by Adventists, if I tell the guy who does my lawn, we do not do Saturday, he understands we do not do Saturday. Up where you are, it might be a little tougher. But you have to simply say, look, if you miss a day and you want to come at your convenience, that's not a problem, but you can't do it Saturday. Okay? Because I can't pay you if you do it Saturday. I'm not hiring you to do Saturday. All right? So you just have to make sure that that's clear in advance. Don't feel terrible, awful because you missed it this time. You didn't expect him to come and he came on his own. But next time you'll know if anything like that happens, you have the absolute authority to go and say, hold on, time out. We're not doing this today. Okay? You have to do that. Look, I took authority, and that's just because we were guests on a property, but we actually had rented it for the time. So theoretically, it was my property for that week. And I made the guy who came on the property stop. I said, if you have a problem, take it up with the owner, but, as long as I'm here, you're not doing this today. And he was nice about it. We didn't fight about it. I said it as gently. I said, listen, I know you don't understand, but this is our holy day, and we're having services, everything, and we're not having you do the lawn today. Okay? And then I had to tell the owners what I did. Now, they were actually nice about it, too. They said, well, he wasn't supposed to come on Saturday, and we try to respect all that. So I said, okay, so at least that worked out. But again, it's getting control over what you can have control over. You cannot control when your family members have a wedding or a funeral or the schools run a graduation. What you can control is whether or not you go. Okay? My cousins had one of their daughters had a bat mitzvah. Now, bat mitzvah is not a problem to go to on Shabbat if you're talking about just going to the services, because the services is just them leading the service. Whoever's doing is the bat mitzvah, or the girl, or the bar mitzvah boy is simply leading the regular Shabbat service. What you're not doing on Shabbat is going to the party afterwards. Okay? So my cousin, who was in Atlanta at the time, had this going on. We were living in Florida. We came up for the bat mitzvah. We went to the service because it's a Shabbat service. Nothing wrong with that. And we said, and it was late enough in the year where sundown wasn't going to be too much after services. So we said, fine, we will go back to the hotel and we'll meet you at the party after sundown. And so we did go after sundown. And so think about how these things work out and how you can protect things. Okay? I was at a Messianic conference at a congregation when I was first kind of coming into Messianic, where the guest speaker invited, and the leader of that congregation invited Julie and I to go to lunch, or supper, after the Saturday meetings, and sundown wasn't for like another hour and a half. And we just politely said, can we meet you at the restaurant? Where are you going? We'll be there at 6:30 or 7 o'clock after sundown. Now, of course, they looked at us like, oh, what are you judging us? And what else? Like, look, you guys do what you want to do. But this was the guest speaker, very well-known guest speaker, by the way, and the congregation leader going right from services to a restaurant. And I was like, I appreciate the invite. Think about that opportunity, thinking, I'm getting to go. Nobody else is getting invited, just a few people to go have dinner with the guest speaker. Who could give up that opportunity? Or you could say, or I could dishonor my father who told me not to. What about that opportunity? Okay. Because that was an opportunity for me to show who I put priority on. So we just politely said, wow, we really are excited about the opportunity and we'd love to come meet you. Where are you going to eat? Can we meet you in an hour? Because it was getting close. And so we got there while they were eating dessert. And they were actually nice enough to wait while we ordered food, and they sat with us while we ate. And so it worked out fine. But we did not, go earlier. We didn't rationalize to ourselves saying, oh, but the opportunity, because we're going to talk about Yahweh, we're going to focus on Yahweh, this guest speaker. No, we're going to go do business in a restaurant. And I looked at my wife and said, and she didn't have any hesitation either. I was like, yeah, we'll go. Well, let me just ask him if we can meet him there later. Where are you going to draw your lines? Because these are all tests. These are all like little pop quizzes for us that come up in our lives. These are those Deuteronomy 8:2 moments. Are you going to show whether it's in your heart or not to keep the commandment, or are you going to show whether it's in your heart to do what you want to do? And you're going to spin it.
If family members are spending a week visiting and they will not keep Shabbat and prefer to leave the house that day to pursue their own things, how does that affect us if they are under our home?
Okay, guests are different, especially when it's family members. If you have your family come over, what you have to do is let them know what you're not going to do. They can go do whatever they want, if that's what they want to do. Okay, now my parents have learned when they visit, they just don't visit on weekends. They come during the week when they visit me. They're not going to spend Shabbat. They're not going to deal with any Shabbat stuff because they don't want to get involved with all that. But if you're going to have family that's staying and it's going to cover over a weekend, let them know, this house keeps Shabbat. I am going to services. You're welcome to do whatever you need to do. You're welcome to come. Do what you need to do. But just know that during that 24 hours, I'm going to do what I do, which is I spend time with my Creator and with the brethren. And you're welcome to do that as well. And so there's a limited authority when you have a guest. This is talking about those who are dwelling amongst you. In other words, the one who lives on your property like as a permanent guest resident. Not somebody who just showed up for a couple of days. That's a whole different sort of relationship. But then knowing that, you should let them know before they come, look, when I go to New York and visit my folks, my parents know that my family is going to Shabbat services or we're going to watch the live stream. And we're not going to be doing anything on Shabbat. And they may run off and go do whatever they do, and they do. They often just leave and do whatever they do. I don't know what they're doing. I don't ask. I don't care. But we're going to keep Shabbat. Okay? That's for me and my house, right?
In Isaiah 58, he says to refrain from doing our own pleasure on Shabbat, on Sabbath. Mm-hmm. Could you please explain what is meant by our own pleasures?
We are going to cover Isaiah 58 next week, probably. Okay? That's a very, very important. It's verse 13 and 14, the last two verses of Isaiah 58. Critical to add to your parameters when you're trying to figure out what's appropriate on Shabbat or not. Okay? So, to give you a simple answer for right now, when your pleasure is actually definable as something he says is his pleasure, then it's okay. I enjoy, like Kara said, she loves to come here. That's part of her pleasure. But it's also his pleasure because it's what he wants us to do. So that kind of pleasure you can have on Shabbat because it's something he commands to do. Okay, it's his pleasure that you come and be with each other and celebrate and sing and dance and pray together and all the things that we do. And some of you love all that stuff, and that's great. So that's when your pleasure and his pleasure matches that it's not a problem. But it's like the person who wants to spin, that's why it's okay to go for a 10-mile bike ride or go do a bunch of laps at the pool or go work out at the gym or whatever. They're spinning that their pleasure somehow is his pleasure when that's not true. So we have to be very careful about it.
How or what do you do when you have a non-believer living in your home that is a grown adult and works on Saturdays? Is this something we would have an authority over?
Listen, when you're dealing with adults, authority comes from the point of view of an agreement. So I don't know what agreement you have with this adult that's now in your house. I know who it is, I think, but I'm saying, when you bring an adult into a house with other adults, there should be a discussion beforehand what is going to work and what's not going to work in that house, and how much authority each one has and how that authority is going to integrate with each other. But if you already have that person in your house and you've already brought them in under an agreement where none of this was discussed, well, then you have very little you can say about it. The best you can do at that point is think of them if they're like a renter. Okay, they're in the house. A lot of times this is a family member that is now there in the house and staying for a long period of time. They have to then just understand that you do what you do, and they have to make sure that what they do doesn't interfere with what you're doing. They have to respect that. So that includes whether or not you allow certain types of food in the house, whether you allow certain types of behavior in the house. It's your house. But you should have it by agreement. You can't make them comply to something they didn't agree to. They're an adult. So you have to have an agreement. Of course, they could look you in the eye and go, well, you didn't say all of this when you said I could stay here. See, it should have been talked about. Okay, parents do this a lot with their children when they say, when they get to be 18, 19, 20 years old, and say, look, as long as you're living here, though, you can't bring a boy or a girl into the house, into your room, or you can't bring certain types of food into the house, or you can't do well, but I want to do all those things. Fine, go somewhere else and do it. You can't do that here, because that's where the authority is. Now, but if you've invited an adult into your house and allowed them to come and stay, well, then you should have had a discussion and need to have a discussion as to what is expected. This goes back to a teaching that I've kind of talked about and done a little bit, the idea of, making expectations or setting expectations. If you don't set them, people will jump to them on their own. So it's always the best idea. I teach all of the leadership this when we talk about starting congregations and everything else. And I talk to parents with their children. I talk to all, husbands and wives when they're first counseling about getting married. A man and a woman wanting to get married. Set your expectations. Don't let them get their own. Because when you got married, I'll give you an example, you as a woman had an absolute idea in your head what a wife looked like and what a husband looked like. And he had an idea in his head what a husband looked like and what a wife looked like. And if you didn't talk about it, I promise you they didn't match. And so each one had an expectation. When you started coming here, you already had an idea of what I should be doing as the leader or whatever, the rabbi of the congregation, and what you should be doing. I had an expectation too. I promise you, some of that didn't match. Setting expectations alleviates all of those problems. That's where you have to have a conversation. By the way, part of what we're going to do today in our little discussion with the congregation after services is talk a little bit about expectations. Because we have a lot of new people, and we should talk about what we should be expecting from each other, what you should expect from the leadership, what the leadership should expect from you. And so as long as we can get everybody on the same page, this will function beautifully. For the most part, we already are, and that's why it does function beautifully. So when we're talking about having someone in your house, the problem is our heartstrings get pulled on, and we just right away say, of course you can come in and not realize, what did I just do? I probably should have had more of a conversation before doing that. I needed to set expectations. This is what I expect from you if you're in my house. This is what you can expect from me as owner of the house. And if that's agreeable, you can come. Simple. Unfortunately, after it's already happened, not so simple.
Okay, from Early wants to know, he usually starts his day at 6 a.m. studying, and by the time this Sabbath meeting ends, he feels compelled to nap. Is that something that is allowable?
Listen, you can take a nap on the Sabbath. A Sabbath day's rest, having a little bit of rest, is absolutely a blessing. I didn't want to pick so hard on the people that want to sleep. It's the sleeping all day mindset that's wrong. Okay? If you have a service that ends early enough and you can go home and lay down and take a nice little nap, look, I sleep in on Sabbath. I wake up about 10:30, 11. I do that almost every day. All right, so for me, it's not such a big difference. And some of you are thinking, man, that guy's lazy. No, I go to bed at 4. It's not the same, And last night, I was finishing working on this at about 3:30. So getting up at 10:30 was not staying up, not getting that much sleep anyway. The point is, Yes, absolutely, it's good to take a nap and relax and rest on the Sabbath. The point is, don't use it as an excuse to avoid the instruction about not forsaking assembling together, where you need to be with each other. The refreshing is different than the resting. You can take a nap and rest. You come here to be refreshed. It's a different thing. You can take a nap and you'll feel better because you got some sleep and you're rested. You feel more rested. But come here to be refreshed. That's the difference.
Okay, from William. He lives in Alaska, where the moon does not set for long periods of times, and during the winter months, and in the summer, it's hard to even find the moon. So what is he supposed to do in that?
Well, that's why I said we're not using the moon for anything.
Later on, he also was talking about, it's also about he never sees the sun in the winter. So
this is now we didn't get to that yet, but we were going to get to that. We're talking about sundown to sundown and versus sunrise to sunrise and that kind of thing. What do you do, when you're in the extremes, where you're in the land of the midnight sun? When the sun never sets, or when it never, it's only sunlight for a few minutes and then it's dark again. In those cases, you have no choice but to actually set some arbitrary times, and that's what you get counsel from leadership to do. Because when we're dealing with Israel has mostly a 6 to 6. That's where they're located in terms of their place on the planet. The sun is pretty much goes, sunrise and sunset. So you're pretty much going from 6 p.m. to 6 p.m. most of the year. But what about when you're places where, the sun sets at about midnight and then rises about an hour later, and so you've had like an hour of darkness, or vice versa. It's only been light for an hour or less. Okay, so what do you do? And so we'll talk about those things next week or the week after. I'll write that down as part of it. It's actually in my notes already to do. But that is a challenge because of the way the planet is actually now, because it's knocked off on its axis and it's not, just getting that equal hours and time the way you would otherwise do. And so we'll have to work those things through, okay? But yes, it's a great question, because if you are trying to do sunset to sunset or sunrise to sunrise, well, what if it doesn't set or doesn't rise? What do you do? Well, that's when we have to then understand the spirit of it and do the best we can by picking an arbitrary time, like 6 to 6, okay? My feeling is if you've got enough of a time difference where you can do it even when sunset starts getting as late as 9 or 10 o'clock, fine. You're still going to be able to go until the next day, 9 or 10 o'clock. You're still getting your 24 hours. But when it starts to get to be where you have to pick some time. Otherwise, you're not really having a Sabbath. You've got to set apart some time. The best thing, of course, to do is to counsel with somebody.
What do you say to people that tell you that no one knows what day the actual seventh day is because the calendar has been changed? People talk about the Sabbath as a day of physical rest. What about spiritual rest and rest from the worldly junk we have to deal with all week long?
All right. Well, I think I addressed the second part by saying absolutely I agree with you that when you come here, you are putting all that stuff away. You're getting that spiritual rest. The calendar issue, let's just settle this part real quickly. When the calendar switched from the Julian to the Gregorian, they inserted a bunch of numbers. They didn't insert any days. Wednesday still followed by Thursday. Whenever, I don't know what day it was when they added, they had like 11 days or something? It was 11 or 13 or whatever it was. Okay, let's just say it was 11 days just for an arbitrary number. Anybody know for sure what the days were? Was it 10? Okay, so let's say it was 10 days, okay? So all they did was take whatever day it was, let's say that was the 11th, and make the next day the 21st or 22nd. All they did was change the number on the day. They didn't say, okay, let's go forward 10 days, and now Tuesday, the next day is going to be Sunday, because we skipped 10 days. No, it still went from Tuesday to Wednesday. They did not touch the days of the week when they fixed and adjusted their calendar. All they changed was the number. Go do your research. Just look up in Wikipedia, whatever. Look up Julian, Gregorian, whatever. All they did was change the number. So like today right now is September 2nd. So it would be like saying that tomorrow would become September 13th. or 12th or whatever. They just changed the number. It's still Saturday then Sunday. They didn't change any of that on their calendar. Didn't affect anything. Now, when they switched, what did affect things is that most of us don't even realize how screwed up this is, but we have September, which is 7, is now the 9th month. October, which is 8, is now the 10th month. December, 10, is now the 12th month. Right? Nov, which is 9, is now the 11th month, because they stuck July and August for Julius Caesar and Augustus Caesar in the middle there. So those months actually were month 7, 8, 9, and 10, which is why they should have stuck them where January is in February and left those as 7, 8, 9, and 10. Instead of sticking them but they wanted them to be the nicer, fun months with warm and beautiful in the summer in that part of the world. So we've got months that make no sense. And when you start to learn the prefixes from math, right, oct and nov and dec, you're like, wait a minute, December's the 12th month. Why is it December? I remember as a kid going, that's weird. But again, it didn't change that the months still went in order, the days of the week still went in order, etc. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. But when they inserted months, again, they just inserted that into the sequencing, but it didn't change the sequencing of days of the week. It simply changed the numbering. We never had a change of days of the week.
Death to one who profanes the Sabbath, but cut off from his people for he who works. What's the difference? Why the different punishment?
With the profaning, I think just to give you a simple answer off the top of my head where I would go with this, is there's a difference between someone who is rebelliously going to gather sticks, that's profaning. And what was he told? What were we told to do? Go kill him. Take the man who went out to gather sticks rebelliously and stone him. Remember that? That's in Numbers 15, right before you get to the instructions about tzitzit. Because the tzitzit to remind you, keep the commandments. Now, the person who works is not doing it rebelliously, is somehow, there's whatever situation is going on, like a new person coming in, they may need to be put out until they figure that out and get it right, as opposed to just being killed. Profaning is done knowing that they're doing something they shouldn't be doing, but they're doing it anyway. But we'll get into that more. There's a rebelliousness to it. Does that make sense? Okay? So one brings death, the other brings, go out, you're on timeout. Go outside the camp till you figure this out. You can come back when you do. Okay, there's a difference in there.
Nina, should she be allowing her kids to play in the park on Sabbath?
There is no problem, in my understanding, with children going and playing in a park on the Sabbath. You take your children. If you're going to sit there with other adults and you're going to talk about Yahweh and all the things you're supposed to be talking about appropriately, and letting children, this is not 18, 19, and 20, this is children playing and running around. However, going to a park and letting them play and be children, and by the way, if you're in New York or any place where there's big Jewish communities, you will find them all in the park, sitting there, and they're all in their outfits from Shabbat, letting their children run around and play and whatever. However, we're not doing organized sports. Now we're talking about taking something from just allowing children to just let off steam and run around to now organizing team sports and organized, basketball and football and softball and everything else. But letting them just when they're little, we're talking about 4, 5, 6 years old, 7 years old, and they're going to run around and play in a park and they're chasing each other and just being kids. Because they're going to do that no matter where you are. They're going to do it in your house. They're going to do it in the park. They're going to do it at services. That's what kids do. So giving them a place to get some fresh air or just let them do in a completely unorganized way, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. What we're not doing is soccer and softball and little league and whatever, and football in an organized, competitive way. Is this making any sense to everyone? But your little children who cannot stay still for a 4-hour service, okay, we take them outside too and let them run around. The teachers will take them out at some point if they're done with their stuff, if the service is around, let them run around. No problem with that at all.
What do you do when your job runs into Shabbat and you can't get off early? He runs into this problem sometimes in the winter.
If you have a Shabbat issue at work that you cannot get the bosses to make sure that you can protect it, then you need a different job. It's not real complicated.
Can you give him any more scriptural support for the gathering as opposed to staying home on Shabbat? They have folks that are insisting on staying at home.
I don't need more than it being a Mikra Kodesh in Leviticus 23. And Shabbat is the first one mentioned as a commanded gathering. And that's what the word actually means. And not to mention, of course, they're not forsaking the gathering together that you find in the New Testament. Okay, so you have a cooperation, where they are backing each other up there. But it's the actual definition of the instruction that it says, these are appointments, and you are appointed to gather for them. The only time that they were told to stay in their house is at the very first time when they were messing around, not understanding how to deal with the manna, and to gather how much they had to gather, and to trust that Yahweh would provide. Knowing their human nature, Yahweh said to Moses, tell them to stay in their tent while they figure this out, while they see how the miracle works. And that way would also be obvious who wasn't listening, because they'd be the only ones outside the tent gathering. Once they became corporate Israel in the nation, in the land, they were told, you are to assemble and gather for these meetings, for these appointments. All right? And by the way, just to the person who I mentioned about the job thing, I'm not saying you need to quit your job tomorrow. I'm not saying that you need to put your whole family in dire straits, call and get counsel. But if you know that you have a job that is going to put you in a compromising position with holy days or Sabbaths, then you should be planning an exit strategy and doing it quickly so that you could be somewhere. Let the Father provide you with something better. There are millions of jobs that don't work Saturdays. There are. There's lots of Monday through Friday jobs. And there are a lot of them that will allow you to not have to work past sundown on Friday. And you can work that out. You just have to go and do the research and figure out what your skill sets match with what jobs are available that don't require that stuff. Or what you could do is go back to the way it was originally designed. You can work for yourself. This country did not have an employee population until the last 120 years or so. People worked for themselves, mostly, until we got industrialized, and then everything became employees. Mostly, we were all running our own little businesses, having our own little farms, or doing whatever we did. That's what it was in Yeshua's day. They didn't have a lot of employment. Nobody was worried about the unemployment numbers back then.
Is it rational lying when one works on the Sabbath and tithes their earnings? Can this be justified scripturally?
Okay. I have in the past explained to people who contact me that there are things called necessary services. In other words, if you have a heart attack, you're going to be very happy there's somebody working in the hospital in the emergency room. Or if you're like one of my children, because both of them had this happen when they were little, they fell and cut themselves in a bad enough way that they needed to rush to the hospital. For some reason, it always was on Shabbat. It was a Friday night, and we ended up having to go. I was very glad somebody was working, okay, in what we call necessary services. By the way, Walmart, Publix, etc., are not necessary services. No restaurant is a necessary service. No retail outlet is a necessary service. However, fire, medical, police, these are necessary services. Israel had all of these. There were people on the walls watching the walls on Shabbat. Always were. There was always people around to do those necessary duties. And so if you are in a necessary service, you should be in it because that's what you're called to do, not just because it pays well. And if you're in it because you're called to do it, then my opinion has always been that you shouldn't be benefiting from doing it on Shabbat. That you're doing it because it's what you're called to do. Okay? And so that's why I have counseled people in the past that one way to handle that, if you are an emergency room nurse or doctor, or you're an EMT, or you're a member of the police department or whatever, that if your shift somehow takes you into Shabbat, that you would then take that pay and donate that pay so that you're not lucratively benefiting. So there's no doubt in your mind where your heart is at in all that. So you're doing it for the right reasons. So if someone thinks that's hypocrisy, well, that's okay. I have to find a way to balance Scripture with reality. And the reality even in Israel was that people were always working in necessary service. By the way, I work Saturdays and every holy day. So did all the Levites, okay? They were doing necessary services. But don't convince me that the post office is necessary services, or don't convince me that the restaurant is necessary services, or some other industry that's not emergency services. But we need people in emergency services 24/7 all the time. And so hopefully you're doing it because you have that anointing and gifting and heart so that you care for the people who are in that great moment of need. In which case, you shouldn't have a problem not doing it for greedy gain. And so, if that seems like hypocrisy, I'm sorry, but that's been my best advice for people who, because I can tell you the people that contact me, they feel awful and guilty when they get paid and they work on Shabbat. And some of them have found tremendous relief working in the hospitals where they work, just sending in that money, not benefiting when they have to work one shift a month on a Saturday in a rotation. All right, that's going to cover it. Hopefully, look, this is, it's not an easy topic. It should be an easy topic, but for some reason it's not. And I can tell you why it's not, by the way. Because we're not doing this as a community, as a world. If we all did it, nobody would have any question about how to do it. Everybody would just be doing it. But because we're not, we're all dealing with the millions of different ways people have interpreted doing it, and mostly they're interpreting it to their best advantage whenever they're interpreting it. That's normally the filter. How can I filter this through my best advantage? How is this going to meet what I would rather it be? And then, of course, what you would rather is not necessarily what you would rather and not necessarily what you would rather, so that's why you get so many different opinions all around the world, because everybody has their different ways of seeing it to their own advantage. For some people, doing A is no big deal, so they do A. Others don't like doing A, so they find a way to spin it to do B instead. But then other people are okay with A or B, but they don't like that, so they do C. We have to be careful. And by the way, that question about the emergency services, again, you want to go to an anointed, appointed, let them help make the decision, because if they're wrong, it's now on them. That's a Deuteronomy 17 moment. I don't know what to do. It's too difficult for me to figure out. Let me go ask somebody who's anointed, appointed to do these kind of things, and that way I've done my part, and if I do what they say, I'm safe, they're at risk. You laugh, but it's so true, right? Then you're safe and they're at risk. And by the way, unless you're anointed, appointed, you shouldn't want the job where you have to constantly put yourself at risk, because you should understand that that's what you're doing. Okay? You have to have that, because you would only do it because you're called to do it. You shouldn't do it because somehow you think it makes you all big and full of yourself or something. Because you have to appreciate the risk. When you come to me, and if I give you counsel, that is now on me. That's big. You need to really think about that.